Well, I'm excited about this last session that we have. So I made the comment, if you read the Great Dechurching, that I think the way it was stated in the book was the apologetics of the future. The skills look more like the skills of a therapist than the apologists and evangelists that we have known in the 20th century. And there's a lot of there that I don't mean. Some people can hear some things that I don't intend for them to hear, but I my my passion is, like I said, church health, evangelism, discipleship. As you've heard, my wife is a therapist. And so as I was writing the book in the very early stages and a little earlier, she is going and getting her counseling degree. And I'm learning about the therapeutic skill of curious listening. And so I began to make some connections that I didn't feel like I'd seen before. And that's what I want to talk about, specifically about evangelism, and ask a way that I think evangelism can become so much more powerful than at the high levels we've generally taught it to be in the American church in the 20th century. So this presentation, actually, this is the first time I've ever given it. Like I'm in conversations with Zondervan about writing this book. And I like to speak a few times on something before I commit. It kind of helps not only me to get my thoughts out, but when we have Q&A, you might see things that I haven't seen that would be a good contribution or help me rethink things. And I'm open to that too. But what I want to do is I want to really talk about this, and I want to look at about 3 different things to make my case for what I'm saying and not saying before I hopefully wrap this thing together. So when I say evangelism, in many contexts, I need to define this because I realize that I don't think we are here, but in some contexts, I'm speaking a different language. I'm talking about evangelism as the loving proclamation of the good news that God has acted in Jesus Christ to save sinners, calling all people to repent, believe, and find new life in him. So there are some assumptions. This is evangelism defined. Maybe I should put there evangelistic assumptions. No one is ever going to respond to the gospel if the Holy Spirit does not open their eyes. That's historic Christianity. Now, there's some ways that Protestants have disagreed on the how, but like that is historic Christianity. And people have to share the gospel for people to believe. That's how God has ordained the spread of his word, the spread of the gospel, the Great Commission to function. So when I start talking about a skill, I want people to understand biblically there are some things that we're assuming to be true. I get nervous these days using a Tim Keller quote because in some circles people like hate him and some still love him. I actually still I find him helpful, but if for some reason somebody here is down on Tim Keller, just take the merits of the quote. I think he has had some really helpful things in this area. I have 2 quotes over the course of this. But he said, evangelism is not imposing your beliefs, but exposing the beauty of the gospel, showing how the grace of Jesus meets the deepest needs of every heart and culture. So where I'm going is showing how the grace of Jesus meets the deepest needs of every heart. And at one level, yes, that's going to happen just through the power of the Holy Spirit. But at another level, we can get better at understanding and seeing the deepest needs in those hearts. The 20th century, I would propose, had some failures in our evangelistic method. Now, some of it comes from being a season where Christianity was in favor, and it was just a high fruit season. It just was, and that's good. But the 20th century tended to focus on the truth of the gospel more than the goodness and the beauty. And so you see this in our evangelistic methods, our apologetic methods. And I'll break this down. So let me start with apologetic methods. And I'm very thankful for these people, but you have Lee Strobel, you have Josh McDowell, you have Ravi Zacharias. You have kind of proving Christianity, winning the argument. And so what evangelism, at some level, I'm not saying everybody did this, the way, if you were to say, hey, I want to become better at this, in the 20th century, someone would point you somewhere where you would be better at winning the argument. You would know more material. And then you get into evangelistic methods, and there was a reductionistic approach. How can we make this easy for everybody to do? Now, this is coming from somebody who came to faith through the 4 spiritual laws. So I'm not dogging the 4 spiritual laws, but I am saying from years of experience in harder soil cultures that, that it can feel at times like we're saying, walk through the 4 spiritual laws, Roman road, whatever it is. And if somebody doesn't believe by the end of it, that's on them. And I would argue, well, that's not the example we're given in the Bible. And I think even we can see through common grace that there's more here that we can do. And it's, so if the 20th century has put such an emphasis on truth, and I do believe the gospel is true, the Bible is true, I don't think it should surprise us that that in the absence of really supporting the good and the beauty, which means that the gospel is the ultimate plan for human flourishing and why, then I don't think it should surprise us that we get to the 20th century and we have people doubting the goodness and the beauty of the gospel, and they're asking, is Christianity good? Are Christians bigoted for their closed-minded, narrow views and what they believe? So it's not just about being true. It's about also communicating the goodness and the beauty. I sometimes think it's helpful to think about evangelism as an introduction. You're introducing 2 people. Now, obviously, there's a third party if you want to. That kind of gets into Trinitarian heresy. So let me be careful how I say this. But the third party being the Holy Spirit. But like if God has ordained that we get to introduce people to Jesus, and He is very much involved in that process, at some level, like any introduction, the better we know both parties, the more helpful the introduction is. If I were, to introduce Troy to one of you, I kind of know Troy now, but if I introduce him to somebody who I really don't know, there's only so much I can do in terms of an introduction. But when you have 2 old friends, they don't know each other, and you get to introduce them. You know all the right ways, how to put their interests and desires and life experience together in a way that is going to foster the introduction. In the same way, I would say in the 20th century, we, generally speaking, we did a really good job of walking with Jesus and knowing Jesus. There wasn't as much of a premium on knowing the other person that we're introducing Jesus to. Again, lots of exceptions here, but as a whole, what was taught in the popular culture, I would say there was a deficiency there. So my proposal is that there is a way that we can know our audience better and more helpfully make this introduction to show them how their story finds its best end in Jesus. And this is through recapturing the lost art of curious listening. And I say lost art because even I don't know when the phrase curious listening was created. That's probably a good thing for me to research. But I think this has existed for thousands of years. So what is curious listening? Curious listening is a form of intentional listening marked by genuine interest and openness. So instead of listening just to reply or judge or win, a curious listener seeks to truly understand the speaker, what they're saying, how they feel, and why it matters to them. For about 15 years, my wife and I speak at various marriage things through Family Life, and I would ask mental health professionals, if all of your patients had somebody in their life who knew them, loved them, and knew how to attentively and curiously listen to that person, how many of those people would still be your clients? And your general therapists would say 80 to 90% would be gone. Now, Of course, when you get to psychologists and psychiatrists, that number gets lower because there's some specific needs there that are unique to them. But the point I used to make is the power, like the gift of listening, the true gift that you can give your spouse, you can give your friend, and I'm bringing that into the realm of evangelism. What it's not, curious listening is not a silver bullet. It's not a replacement of the work of the Holy Spirit, and it is not the only way to do evangelism. I don't want anybody to hear me say otherwise. I'm just introducing another tool in the tool belt. It's also not the only posture for a Christian. People would hear me say this, I'm imagining, and say, but there's a time to be, you're forgetting that we're supposed to be bold, we're supposed to be courageous, all these things, which is true. I mean, Ephesians 6, pray for me also, that words may be given to me in opening my mouth boldly to proclaim the mystery of the gospel, that I might declare it boldly as I ought. So there is a place for that. I'm just inserting this other part of listening curiously. So what curious listening is, it's just loving our neighbor. I mean, I think this is just, we're commanded to love our neighbor, whoever they are, whether we're talking about a spouse, a child, somebody in our neighborhood, someone we work with, even our enemies. This is a way that we love them, even if we don't get where we want evangelistically with them. It's honoring those made in the image of God. So I go to a gym that is owned by a very committed lesbian couple. They're my age. They're very impressive people. They're awesome. And I remember the first day I went to the gym, and I told them that I was a pastor, and you could just see walls going up. You could just, I mean, it was just like they're nice people, but I could see that there was extreme hesitancy, and it took years, but now we're really good friends. I know their stories and their hurts and their hopes. They're not Christians, but the walls came down through me desiring to understand them more than impose my views on them at an early season. Does that make sense? So it's learning the hopes, fears, and pains and wounds of somebody, seeing the lost as people, not just projects. Because when I was on staff with Campus Crusade, and again, very thankful, still work with Campus Crusade in many ways, but it was kind of like, all right, if they're not interested after those 4 laws, you need to move on to somebody who is. And if what we're doing is loving our neighbor, then that's a part of the command wherever this relationship leads. So it's developing friendships. It is finding the most helpful connection between their hopes and hurts in the gospel. Now, as we go forward, I was teaching a class on evangelism at Reformed Theological Seminary, and I didn't have this presentation, but it was the first time I'd kind of put my toes in a classroom environment into this stuff. And for some people, it was like, I've never thought about this. For others, one guy said, Jim, this is just how you make friends. And I was like, true. But what I want to think about, it comes intuitively to some of us. It does. Actually, I wouldn't say it. I should say some of you, because I think that's just something I've had to grow in a lot. But as I go further into this presentation, I want us to think not just about ourselves. And I do think all of us can grow in this area. But what does it look like when a community is all learning and doing this together? And my proposal is that that would be a powerful community of believers in any city. So, traits of curious listening: non-judgmental. You're not trying to evaluate or correct the person as they speak. Open-ended. You ask thoughtful questions that invite deeper insights rather than just yes or no questions. Curious listening is patient. You allow space for silence, reflection, or processing rather than rushing in. It's empathetic. You tune into both words and emotions, trying to feel what the other person feels. It's present. You're focused, not distracted by forming your response or thinking about yourself. So when I'm talking to my kids just about how to thrive in school. I tell them there's one secret. If you want to go and make friends in school, the secret is get others to talk about the things that they love the most, which is, for almost everybody, ourselves. and and I want you to be a person that asks more questions than gives more answers. That kind of person is going to draw down walls, is going to build trust. Now, whenever I have empathetic here, in this day and age, I need to define empathetic. Some of you know what I'm talking about, and give a little bit of a defense for that word, because that word is at the very least pushed against in Christianity, in largely Reformed Christianity today. So empathy is feeling what someone else feels. It's entering into their emotional world. It means to suffer with. And the argument against empathy is, Jim, our job is to bring justice and truth. And if we feel what other people are feeling, then that's going to it's going to cause us to not stand for truth, because we're going to be swayed by what they feel. And my argument is, guys, we can walk and chew gum at the same time. Like we can know truth and feel what they feel, and not have that truth watered down in any way in our soul. So suffer with. Obviously, Hebrews 4:15. This I want you to. I'm going to read the verse, but the word sympathize is what I'm focusing on. For we do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with our weakness, but one who in every respect has been tempted as we are, yet without sin. Later in Hebrews, for you had compassion on those in prison, and you joyfully accepted the plundering of your property, since you knew that you yourselves had a better possession and an abiding one. So that word sympathy and compassion, same Greek word from sympasko. So it literally means to suffer with. So we're talking about Jesus. It's commended in believers. This is not something that's been created in 21st century therapeutic culture. This goes all the way back, suffering with, to feel what they are experiencing. This is a biblical concept, and I would say not only affirmed, but commanded for Christians. So we're called to extend Jesus's costly, active compassion toward other people. Not only that, I said it not only affirmed, but commanded. Romans 12, rejoice with those who rejoice, weep with those who weep. Galatians 6, bear one another's burdens, so fulfill the law of Christ. Proverbs 18, if anyone gives an answer before he hears, it is his folly and shame. Proverbs 20, the purpose of a person's heart are deep waters, but one who has insights draws them out. So we're drawing the insights out. James 1:19, let every person be quick to hear, slow to speak, slow to anger. So nothing that I'm saying is new. In the Bible, I think we can see this concept as well. So the woman at the well, Jesus asks her a question, will you give me a drink? And then he says, go ask. She talks to him. He says, go ask your husband. And, Jesus knows what's going on, but he responds based on her deepest need. He lets her talk. And what is the result? She feels seen and heard. She's focused. She feels understood. I love the road to Emmaus. The disciples are walking distraught after Jesus's crucifixion. Jesus comes up to them. They don't know it's Jesus. And he says, what are you discussing? And they said, have you not heard all the things? Jesus says, what things? And so they start talking. And what you see is he's drawing out their emotions, their grief. He's letting them express their confusion, their unmet expectations. And as a result, when he comes in, he lets them bring their emotions forth. Then he tells them the truth. And Luke records that their hearts burned within them and their eyes were opened. The blind man in Mark 10, he says, Jesus, son of David, have mercy on me. And Jesus says, what do you want me to do? And And it's like, it's so obvious what he wants you to do, but Jesus continually makes people answer questions, even if they seem obvious. And in that moment, he's giving this blind beggar the opportunity to have agency and dignity, and some measure, even the short period of time of relationship is built. I love the rich young ruler. He has interest. He calls Jesus good, and Jesus asks, "Why is it that you call me good?" And he's doing this because he knows the errancy of the rich young ruler's beliefs. He knows the limits of his willingness to follow Jesus. And he puts his finger on the main issue. He draws out this man's beliefs through a really good question. I think it's worth seeing that Jesus has strong words. He has very strong words, but they're targeted. They're not random. His strong, bold, courageous words, they're reserved for the Pharisees, for the religious elite, for demons, for powerful Herods and kings that opposed him. So Jesus is not afraid to be bold and truthful, but the pattern you see with lost people is that he listens, he asks questions, he invites rather than imposes, and he restores rather than rejects. So that Jesus is strategic in the way that he approaches different people. And I'm wanting to be more like that in my own ministry. I want our church to grow in this. And so we see in Jesus' curious listening, he builds trust. It's not always just a case. He does ask questions that invite self-discovery and faith. He listens. Of course, Jesus is going to fix. So, but the way he listens, it's more to be able to build trust and bring truth in the context of a relationship. And he walks people through their own stories, not over many sessions like a therapist, as best I can tell from what we have in the Gospels, but because he's Jesus, he's able to just jump all the sessions and get right to the main thing. But he still is walking people through the most important and maybe hardest aspects of their own story. Now, this is an interesting one. I do talk about this a little bit in the Great Dechurching. In Acts 17, Paul is at the Areopagus, and he has this comprehend, commend, critique kind of pattern. So he comprehends the culture that he's in. And it's, you have to assume, there's an assumption going on here, that as Paul's walking in this culture, he's talking to people, he's asking good questions, because you don't get to his level of comprehension without asking a lot of questions and understanding. So then he commends them. He says, he commends their desire to worship. So he's not commending their pagan worship. He's saying your desire to worship is good. And then he critiques and says, let me show you where your worship should be directed. And so, there's some element here. If we can't commend somebody for who they are and how they're living their life and their worldview, then we don't really understand them, because there's nobody I'm around where there's not something to commend. Even if they're making self-destructive decisions, there's something to commend. And if we can't find that, then we haven't done the job of comprehension. And it's not until we've comprehended and commended them where they need to be commended that critique is often received in a helpful way. Now, again, different for everybody. This could be one sit-down conversation where you go through all of it. This could be years of a relationship. All right, so I'm going to shift now, thinking back about that Keller quote, and then looking at the ways that Jesus could put the bullseye on someone's deepest emotional longings and hurts. And I'll talk about the power of someone's story. Our stories, they influence, say the reverse. Other people's stories influence how they see us. And so we need to understand what has transpired in their lives, especially in the hardest of soil, that causes them to see us in a certain way. Kind of like the lesbian gym owners. I understand why they looked at me the way that they did. hearing and caring about another person's story, it brings down walls. And I know this from being the recipient of this. I have friends who ask me good questions and they want to understand how I feel about certain things, or they know certain hard things have transpired and they have questions. And I just can feel every wall going down. Like I'm thankful for that person. I want to talk more about this in a healthy, safe environment. And so this is a gift because I've received it. I want to give to other people. And the way to someone's heart at some level is ultimately through their story. A person's story is how we most helpfully connect them to the story of the gospel. And I would say that there's just real power when that happens. And so for some people, and I'm not, the order can change here. Like some people I've seen come to faith, but it's, it's later that the gravity of the gospel and their deep wounds and hurts really connect with the power of the gospel through the power of the Holy Spirit. So it's not only an evangelistic thing, it's a part of discipleship as well. I'm going to make the argument in a minute. It's a part of a lot more than even that. This is the second Keller quote. Everybody has got a story. If you're able to inhabit that so well that people feel that you know their story better than they do, and then show in a compelling way how that story is only going to find its resolution in Jesus, then they are going to find a compelling case for Christianity. All right. Let me stop there. Any questions? Yes, in the back.
The place of in the listening where you raise questions, I'm wondering where you would put observation as part of that process to better understand
I'm going to get there. That's a good question. I'm going to cover that in just a second, I think. Back here.
I think you've heard a lot about like active listening as well.
Yeah.
Is active listening a part of curious listening? Is that like part of that, and curious also includes the questions that are asked after it?
I think they could almost be synonymous. Yeah. And honestly, that's a good question. I need to verify that. But when I think of the two, I think of them as functionally the same thing. Or maybe this is where, if my wife were here, she would have a great answer to that. Active listening is being able to take, to really immerse yourself in what they're saying in a way where you're not just thinking about the next thing. Curious listening, this is encompassed in all of what I'm saying. Curious listening is understanding how to take that and know them more, and then be active in that space. That's the best. I think that would be the best way I know to answer that. All right, so let's go. And this is the part that's like really basic, but as we go through this, the first time I was talking with a group of professional soccer chaplains, and they were really struggling in the locker room to try, especially in the female range, some in the male range, because there's so many walls between many of these soccer players and the chaplains. They felt like we did a good job with with believers, but it was so hard to engage unbelievers. And that was the very first time I kind of walked through this process. And this is when I began to think, gosh, I have a long way to go in this. And if the majority of our congregation knew how to do this and desired to do it, I mean, I think we in the South, we have a phrase, Katie bar the door. Do y'all say that here? It means, gosh, I don't know what your equivalent it would be, but like, hold on, get ready. Like, like if everybody had these kinds of skills. So they can seem basic, but I feel like they're very powerful. So the first part of this starts before we're ever in the conversation, is what we're believing in that moment. We believe they are made in the image of God. We believe they have hurts, hopes, and confusions that they do want to share with somebody, even if they don't seem like it. That we have to believe that their story connects to the gospel, that Jesus is the best ending to every story, We need to believe that we need to know their story before we can help them see how it connects to the gospel. And we need to believe the Holy Spirit is working. Some is years ago now, when I was in campus ministry at Mississippi State University, there was a starting defensive lineman, and he was about to get kicked off the team, and somebody connected us, and we sat down, and I got to hear a little bit about his story, his anger issues. He's a great athlete, but he had anger issues and he didn't listen. And so I shared the gospel with him. He seemed very interested, and I just said, what you need to do now is talk to God. You need to ask him for faith. Like it's between you and God now, basically. And let's meet up next week. And we got back together, and his whole demeanor was different. And he said, Jim, I a lot has happened this week. He said, I was reading through the Bible, and I read that what a wife needs to be, and my girlfriend didn't match up, so I broke up with her. And I was reading about the Holy Spirit being inside of people, and I think that's happened to me, which is really weird. I need you to explain that to me. And I was reading about how we need to be ready to share the love in our hearts with other people, and I want to do that. The whole football team needs to do that. I don't know how to do that. Can you help me do that? And I'm just like, how is this the same person? It was, and I didn't do much of anything, but the Holy Spirit just moved. And 5 weeks later, he's captain of the football team for Mississippi State University. He's now in full-time Christian ministry with athletes. And so just like every time I go in, I want to remember that story. And you have your own stories. The Holy Spirit is ultimately the one that is going to do this, which gives us confidence as we go into these conversations. So that starts before. Secondly, we engage. So this is starting the conversation. So you have this list of questions. Did you do anything fun this weekend? What will you do this weekend? When you're not working, what do you like to do? This has been a tough season for you. What are you doing to deal with it personally? What these questions have in common is they aren't yes or no questions, but they aren't, with the possible exception of the last one, they're questions that even when walls are up, are appropriate to ask and easily received. And they give you some insight into who they are, what's most important. So then you go to the third step, explore, going deeper. The bullet points are a little odd here. You can highlight shared experiences for their sake, not yours. And you got to be careful. It's not like one-upping, but we can say things like, and this is where it's funny because this bullet point is not highlighting a shared experience, but we can say things like, oh, if you're talking about traveling, that's cool. I like to travel too. What are some of your favorite places that you've been? So you're going from fact to opinion. We hadn't gone to emotion and transparency, but you're going from fact to opinion. Do you feel like you got to let off the steam you needed this weekend? How are you coming into this week? What makes you, if they went to the beach, what makes you choose the beach this weekend? Is that rejuvenating to you? You like that better than the mountain? So there's this trajectory, fact, opinion, emotion, transparency. And it's good for us to understand what level are we at with them and not stay shallow, not dive in deep too fast, not stay deep the whole time. It's good to come up. You know any scuba divers there's not a scuba diving part of the country I recognize. Like in scuba diving, I just got everybody except my 10-year-old scuba certified. And when you go deep, you cannot stay there for a long time or you get nitrogen narcosis. Nitrogen gets into your bloodstream and it can kill you. So that's the analogy that comes to mind. Like we don't want to stay at the surface because we want to see the glories of the bottom of the ocean. We want to get there slowly and we can't stay there forever. So we have to be appropriate in how we do it. Being okay sitting in silence. This is actually something I find really hard for church leaders. We ask a question. It could be a Bible study. It could be a one-on-one conversation. And there's this feeling among pastors and ministers and Bible study, Sunday school leaders, like their greatest contribution is to make sure there's never silence. But some of the there's so many people who need a moment to be introspective and think. And sometimes the greatest gift we can give somebody is silence to be able to process in their head and then to say what they really feel. This is one of the biggest things that has changed for me. When I go into a conversation, I can tell either I'm not curious about them, or I don't, or I don't care to be curious. I'm being really honest, or I don't know how to do it. And I ask myself, what would it look like to be curious about this person right now? And without fail, every time I ask myself that, I'd be like, good questions start coming to my mind. What would it look like to be curious? And I start finding myself becoming more curious. All right, there's value to demonstrating, showing you comprehend. So this doesn't mean you have to agree with them. You're not endorsing parts of their life, but it's loving to make them feel heard. So let me make sure that I understand. Like you're saying this, and I think it's helpful and we can't do this unless we really understand how their situation would make you feel in their shoes. Man, okay, so this is what I'm hearing. I would feel really, I would feel isolated or hurt or lonely, whatever it is, if I were in that situation, and ask them back, is that how you feel? And then maybe they'll say, well, not so much because of this, and we'll understand them better. Or they'll say, yes, that's exactly how I feel. And then that creates more avenues to understand them more places to become curious as we listen. And the hardest part at this point is to resist giving advice at this point, because there's going to come a point where we're just like, okay, I have some really good thoughts. I know you. I feel like the walls are coming down. I try and resist it at this point. And, and then at some level, like, they've given you a gift. If they're going to open up in a way that they don't open up to everybody, they're giving you a gift of their story, just saying thank you. Thank you for trusting me with this. Thank you for, letting me see you more. I do see you more. It makes me know how to pray for you better. That may or may not resonate with them, but I often say that. And then here's why I say I resist. Just wait. Because 98% of the people on this earth will do one of two things: ask for advice or begin to ask about you. That's when the gold happens. Because then when they're asking you, they're inviting you into their story or trying to understand your story. That's when I see the most powerful gospel conversations happen. We get to share parts of our story where it might connect. If they ask, that there might be, this is a great time again we can critique, and you can bring it all together in a ninja type way and say, man, when you said this, I really understood because of my experience here. Here's how. Here's what has made such a difference in my life. You connect that gospel. You make that gospel connection with that shared experience, and it's beautiful. So results of curious listening: it builds trust, reveals fears and hopes, reveals idols, gives tangible ways to show the truth, the goodness, and the beauty of the gospel. Now, what I want to do at the end, I want to build a case because I'm talking to church leaders. I just really sit in this with me for a second. What would it be like if the majority of our church knew how to do this well? Am I the only one that feels like this would be unbelievable? Like, unbelievable, not only in evangelism, but then they would be brought into a community of believers, maybe before they believe, maybe after they believe. Either way, they're entering into a community where we're doing this in small groups, in Sunday school, and by the coffee, and in our homes. Like, I feel like that would be one of the most powerful things I could possibly imagine in the context of my church. And so, I recognize it's going to take a lot of work. I'm doing some things to really try and grow our church in this way, because I think it's just something that it is You think about the people who have the gifts of evangelism. And when I say the gift of evangelism, I mean there's some people that just lead people to Christ without doing all the things that I feel like we should do. And sometimes they lead people to Christ in spite of their methods. I have a really good friend who is just an unbelievable evangelist on the campus of the University of Mississippi. And a few years ago, he had lunch with somebody and led him to Christ using the wrong name the entire time. I mean, it's just like, it just works for some people. But what I get excited about is giving skills to the vast majority of the church that maybe just don't have this gift. And maybe if the ones who do have the gift add the skill, who knows, could be even better. I don't know. So we're thinking through ways right now. How can we utilize the avenues that we have to develop the skill? And how can we imagine the power in this skill being unleashed in those same kind of environments? You have the organized and the organic. What part of the organized can we helpfully lean into? What part of, and then what might that look like in the organic? So cultivating a listening church, evangelism as a community posture. I already said it's one thing to encounter a curious Christian, but a whole other to walk into a community of curious Christians. And I think that community has, I've already said this, just unbelievable power. So here are a few reflection questions. And again, you can have this, but these are questions I felt like it's been helpful for me to ask myself. What kind of a listener are you? What are your default listening habits? Do you tend to listen to respond or fix? Or do you just tend to withdraw? Or do you not tend to listen? Are you somebody that just tends to talk more than listen? I know I'm more of somebody who I'll listen until I feel like I know what you need, and I'll try to do whatever I can to stop you from talking so I can fix you. Like that's my default. What barriers make it hard for you to listen with curiosity? Are you easily distracted? Is there fear to go certain places? Is there pride? Is it just not knowing where to start? For me, I think pride is probably the one, because I find myself, it's not that I don't know where to start. I'm convicted how often I don't care. And I have to repent of that sin and see the Holy Spirit begin to develop like a genuine care in me toward them. Think about specific people in the scope of your life, your ministry, that you would like to engage. And so whoever those are, and again, I'm saying this with twofold here. I am saying this to you because I'm doing this in my life, but I'm also saying this to you, understanding that you have impact far beyond you. You have armies that you can develop. But on the front end, and I do this with my kids too. Think about a few people. What are 2 or 3 open-ended questions that could begin the conversation? And then if you do that and it goes well, and you don't know what to do after that, that's okay. We'll figure that out later. But it's just like, how do we get the toes in the water? Take the next step. 4, have you seen curious listening open the door to evangelism before? It's kind of just like, hey, let's build our confidence. I do that a little bit, and I saw that work here. And if so, how? Who is one person you'd like to engage this week, and what kind of questions could open the door to hear their story, and what would change in your conversations if our conversations, if we saw evangelism not as just convincing somebody, but inviting them into a deeper story by first hearing theirs, and then inviting them into ultimately God's story of redemption for his people. All right, so that is what I started working on the Great Dechurching and am getting more excited about now. But what I think, tell me, I think the best, so maybe we can have a Q&A on if there are questions, and then we had talked about opening it up to a more general, and we can just do both if that's good.
So I have a question from a person who's listening digitally. They asked the question within our Lutheran context of presenting the law and the gospel. They're wondering where the law would fit in with this active type of listening. Where do we present to them the fact that they are sinners in need of God's
That's a
grace?
good question. I think as we understand somebody, those pieces naturally that we find opening for those pieces. Yes, I mean we have to help people understand the the gospel is good news. It's good news because we are sinners, and the law helps us to see that we are sinners, to see that we need saving. The law is not going to fix us. So if I was meeting with somebody, talking with somebody who is wearing themselves out, trying to be a more moral person, I would say that's an easy place to bring them to the law and that show them their inability to find ultimate satisfaction through their morality or their self-righteousness or whatever it is. And then come to me, all you are weary, and I will give you rest. What does that look like? Because he has fulfilled the law on our behalf. We deserve the wrath of God because of our sin. He took that himself and then handed us his righteousness. So absolutely, law, gospel, but in the context of a relationship. And I would say it's harder. It's easier to go through the relationship with the law and gospel in some sort of small tract. It's easier. But it's harder to do the same thing in the context of relationship, but it's more powerful. Good question.
Have you heard of something called Stephen Ministry? You heard of that?
I have, but I don't remember what it is, but I have heard of it.
Yeah, okay. That's been around for, I'm going to say 40 years or a long time.
Oh, all right.
Stephen Ministry.
I do know what you're talking about now.
Yeah. Okay. My point is that what you're talking about here is, I mean, I've done that in a number of churches over the years, and I haven't, my wife will tell you I haven't mastered the listening part, but they talk a lot about listening. I mean, a lot of what you're talking about here, if you ever get a hold of those materials on Stephen Ministry, it'd be a wealth of research because this is a big part of what theirs was about.
Awesome.
You want to talk? Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh.
Burn?
So compassion fatigue and this kind of listening. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. I mean, they're muscles you have to build. Is that where you're headed? I mean, like, as in how emotionally draining it is for the listener? Yes. I mean, it is. And I know when therapists start working, they have to start with, say, 2 or 3 clients, and they can't do more in a row than that. And you build because it's a muscle that you build. And I think knowing our own, here's the reality though. The average congregant, average church member isn't going to have a line of people to talk to. It's going to be a lunch here or a dinner there. So it is a thing, but I think we're not setting the bar too high. I've said this a lot. That the problem, I believe, in the American church, in all the things that we've discussed, isn't that we're asking too much of our people, but that we're asking too little. And I put this in the same category. But it is a thing. Like I acknowledge that. All right. Well, we can open it up to any kind of question. Is that for you? Oh, all right. You have the question? I got a comment. Great.
Thinking about this curious listening, I'm in a conversation with some people that I'm pretty close with, long history. So we entered into reading some stuff together, book club, basically. But before we started, we had to kind of come to terms with basically all of us saying, we enter this conversation with this kind of base, like we both meet on the foot of this ground level where we say, I could be wrong. And that was probably the most challenging thing for me personally, is because like, no, I mean, I've
That's
got the
good.
MDiv. I mean, you know,
Yeah.
right? But it was really fascinating for me to kind of navigate that, to go, is it possible I could be wrong? Well, I mean, when I say it out loud with a bunch of other preachers, it's like, of course. I mean, I think there's only one person who's never wrong, you know, but to be able to say that,
Yeah,
and really believe it, when I entered that conversation with them, that was a game changer, because that was what allowed there to be safe conversation, and not just conversation with me with the goal to change them. And I think it's such a dangerous thing. And I'm to kind of, when you tie curious listening with sharing the gospel, I think we automatically want to go past curious listening because it's really hard for us.
Yeah.
We got to die to ourselves.
yes.
But when we're able to say and actually give that person the dignity to say, what do you really think? What do you believe? How'd you come to that? That's a game changer, but it's really, really hard.
It is. And here's a connection between this and other things we've talked about. So in 2020 and 2021, it was terrible in our church. About 50% of our membership left. I'd been there 16 months before COVID hit. There were 3 flashpoints. One, we required masks in worship, and a lot of people felt like that's too progressive. Florida, we had COVID for like 2 weeks, but still, it's a little different, I know, in Minnesota than Florida. But we did masks as long as the CDC said, and people left. There were we had some conversations about race and justice that people got mad just that we were having, that were just middle of the road conversations. And then in November of 2020, there was a whole contingency that wanted people in the church to be handing out Trump voter guides in church. I was like, no, unless Jesus is on the ticket, no, we're not doing that. And it was just all this contention and fighting. And connecting to what you're saying, it's actually impossible to be curious and critical at the same time. You can't be curious and critical at the same time. And so now I'm thinking, all right, we're in a good spot. Like the church it is a very good spot, but there are more storms coming down the cultural pike. So what does it look like to set us up for success when that happens? And if we have a body that wants to listen and be curious before we're critical, and seeks to, listens to understand, not just to win, if we had those skills in 2020 and 2021, it would have been a game changer, me included. So you're right. All right, we're opening it up for any kind of question.
I got another online question. It says,
Great.
John Piper was concerned that with relational evangelism, we don't actually get to telling them about the danger they're in. So now here's a question. How do we guard against using the relationship and this listening as an excuse for not getting into uncomfortable questions?
Well, I agree with John there. It's interesting. When I lived in Europe, you saw the missionaries do one of two things. They either, generally speaking, there were some exceptions. Generally, they either went on campus and shared the gospel all day long with people, the full gospel, but didn't really develop a lot of friends. And then you had some that would develop real friendships, but the gospel never came up. And it would be like I remember hanging out with this one missionary, and one of their best friends, Italian friends, who they'd known for months. And it came up that we were missionaries. And that other person said, what? You're a missionary? They didn't even know he was a Christian. And I was like, okay, there's a miss here. So I agree. But I think when we have a curious posture towards somebody and we care about them, then we're going to want them to know Jesus. I actually think what happens when the gospel doesn't get shared in the context of relationship, we're more concerned about ourselves. We're more concerned about ourselves, how we're seen, and maybe in some cases us maintaining certain friendships. But love at some point would dictate that we intentionally go there. So I think it's a real something to be on guard against, but we have to make sure that we don't go the other direction in fear of friendships that never get to the gospel.
So when it comes to be curious listening and having these long relationships, do you think there's ever a time where it comes to like dusting the dust off your shoes and moving on to someone else with time and effort, trying to get them to come to Jesus?
Yeah. I mean, there are only so many hours in the day and so many days in the week and weeks in the year. And so we need to be wise. Now, I think I mean, I have friendships with non-Christians that I'm committed to no matter what happens. Like, I'm not going to not be friends with them because they're not Christians. It takes wisdom. There are some relationships that I'm like, hey, the friendship, it just doesn't seem to be working. Like, not only it doesn't seem like there's a friendship developing. I feel a lot of resistance. I want to make myself available, but at some point, yes, some people aren't going to let you in. We have to be wise with how and I think the other thing is looking at who God has us already in relationship with, whether that's, in my stage of life, who my kids go to school with, who I go to the gym with, some people who live in the neighborhood, kids sports. So like, who are those people that I have all these touch points with? Those tend to be the places that I do it the best. But I can think of one family, one household that I really tried with. They went a direction that was so, I'm trying to find the right word. It was just, they were angry. They were toxic. I tried. Yeah. I mean, like, it wasn't, there were lots of pieces to it. I was like, honestly, God be with you. Like, it's nothing's working here. But I just think it takes wisdom. Start with those who are already in your life. And I just think that, ask Holy Spirit for wisdom. And there is a time, but there's not a formula to figure out where that time is, in my opinion. It's a good question.
Just related to that, and in the same scriptural context, Paul talks about investing in people of peace.
Yeah.
So could that be a certain formula? Like if people are investing in a relationship with you, and wanting to listen, wanting to learn, they're curious, you're curious about them. I mean, is that, in a sense, a formula to seek out and invest intentionally in those people who are people of peace, quote unquote?
Yeah, when there's certain people, in my campus crusade days, they used to call them faithful, available, teachable, but it's spelled fat, so I think they stopped doing it. But it was faithful, available, and teachable. And there's some overlap with what I think Paul meant by persons of peace. That had a little bit more influence too. But I mean, when you find those people, I want to open up more of my schedule to them. I mean, I really do. Or in the context of the church, try to put them with somebody who can be with them. But yeah, there's certain people that I'm trying to not use crass terms, but there's a strategic nature, or a gospel open door might be a better way to say it, but I try to keep one person in my ministry, my evangelistic ministry, that doesn't fit any of the categories, just to, because it feels like the right thing to do. But yes.
You can tell I didn't learn about the listening part. Now you've been here all day, and you'll be out of town very soon. So now you can enter right into this. You've had a chance to read this room.
Yep.
Okay, so
We'll
here's
come
the
back.
deal. So I'm going to speak an evangelistic message right after the Charlie Kirk thing. And some on my staff warned me, oh, politics, that kind of thing. You better give a disclaimer or whatever. Well, I remember I said one statement, as he had learned in his life, politics is like a pebble, and the gospel and crowding heaven is like everything. You know, he had gotten to that place. But anyway, so I used a lot of illustrations from our local situation to start the message. And then I did talk about Charlie Kirk's widow, who said, go to church. And we literally had at least 5 different people I sent welcome letters who came to church that Sunday. And this is the next Sunday or whatever. But so I delved right into it. And I did not get backlash, you know, and I focused on a biblical person, Philip, you know, like a lay person sharing the gospel, both in Samaria and going down the road to a private conversation, things like that. But I was warned by my own staff members, you better be careful, you know. So now that you've been here for a whole day and you've read this whole room, and you can just tell by expressions and all the face where you can go, I want you to weigh in on that one.
I had the same situation. You know, in our context, you have people, I think there's a spectrum. So first of all, we had hurting people. I'm a pastor. People were hurting. Some were hurting because they were Gen Z guys who had followed him for years. Some were hurting because they're boomers who had never heard of him, but now that they've been watching the videos, feel like they've lost their son. And I don't say that to be joking, but like it's a real thing. You have some people who felt like, see, this is what Christians need to be and do in terms of politics and political advocacy. There's not a person of color or a pastor of color I know that did identify with Charlie Kirk. And there are people who think he's a racist. That's the spectrum. I'm not saying, but like that's a minefield. And so I'm trying to think, how can I navigate this? Generally, I use a pastoral prayer because I think private conversations are better because everybody's coming at it from different angles. So I did a pastoral prayer on this, and I sent it to the people who were most anti-Charlie Kirk and pro-Charlie Kirk and said, is this a prayer that you could pray? And they all said, yes, thank you, Jim. I feel like you understand. Thanks for asking. And then the message was on gospel sensitivity. It was talking about Timothy and Epaphroditus in Philippians 2, I believe, and what made them uniquely able to come into a church and bring peace the way that they did in turmoil and chaos. And I made the comment, I said, this is the only thing I'm going to talk about in the sermon on this, but I just want us to, I just want to see that this kind of gospel sensitivity could have spared us all a lot of pain this week. And everybody, I think, who knew me and heard my message heard my prayer. They understood kind of what I meant. Well, someone went and took my sermon clip. I don't know if you saw it, Doug Wilson did a video on it, Megan Basham and some others. And it's just like, basically there were two. One group said, Jim said if Charlie Kirk were more sensitive, he wouldn't have gotten killed. I never said that. The second one was, there's no room for gospel sensitivity. That's emasculated Christianity. We need to fight. We need to win. We need to combat. And the irony in this, I was telling Troy this. Does anybody know who U.S. Representative or former Representative Matt Gaetz is? Okay, so when I was in college, I ran for senior class president at Florida State. Got it. He was my campaign manager. So I'm not endorsing him, but we go back. So if you know him, he's a bulldog. He's not averse to a fight. He's going to win every argument. And he texted me and said, bro, your Christian world is more cutthroat than my political world. And I was like, he's right. Like, this is gross. I can't even say the words that I was called. And I'm a little bit getting a little off the question, but there's something wrong with our world when a message that's crafted for 500 to 600 people who I feel like I know pretty well and who know me and can talk to me, and is taken out of context, put on the internet. But it is a minefield because we have hurting people, and our job as pastors, more than correcting politics, is to shepherd hurting people to Jesus, which is what I think in my context, I think what I did. But clearly God uses cultural events. He does. He used 9/11 in certain ways. He used the 2008 recession in certain ways. And he used Charlie Kirk in certain ways, and praise God for the way that he wants to choose to use these things. There are pastors that make me really nervous out there, like Mark Driscoll, who seems to be using this to rebrand and develop his new platform. Like, that makes me nervous if we're jumping on the train to bring more glory to ourselves, and hope that doesn't end up on the line somewhere. But it makes me nervous. So I don't know. I kind of gone a lot of different ways, but gosh, it's atrocious what happened. The other thing that I think I see and appreciate, it does seem like Charlie started purely political, and that his faith became more of an aspect of what he did over time. And so now when clips are shown where maybe that I don't agree with, I'm kind of thinking, but I wonder when in his life this was, because it does seem, so I want to give that kind of gospel charity. And gosh, anybody who's out there talking as much as talking much is going to say things that others disagree with, but nobody should be murdered over that. I got a hand over here.
Hi, thanks for everything. I'll take a little different, softer direction than that last one. I'm going to go back to the first presentation, more data oriented, just contemplating more some of the trends in the Dechurching over the last 25 years. I have the impression, now I'm speaking anecdotally here, that similar trends have happened outside of church, particularly.
Yeah.
Can you speak to other correlations and some other cultural things that might be behind some of those greater trends?
So it's a really good question. There is a decline in institutional trust in the United States. I think the Gallup follows something like 20-ish institutions and has polled for a very long time America's trust in those institutions. And every single institution, the institutional trust is down except two. One was the military. I can't remember what the second one was, but the church is at some level an institution. And so we are caught at some level in lowering institutional trust. I think that plays into it. What's interesting, some people would say, well, look at Europe and you can see our trajectory. And I think that because their institutional trust failed well before ours did. The reason I think that it's right and wrong. It's right in that, yes, when you have that many people who no longer are Christians or go to church, there are implications in society. But the reason that I think we have not tracked that direction is because of our separation of church and state. Like, their churches are connected to their state. So when state institutional trust is on a decline, the church is just locked steady with it. Here, there's distance between the church and the state, and we have the ability to speak out against, with, whatever. And it's a real big fundamental difference. Now, I will say in England, what do they call it? So I kind of poo-pooed a little bit on the Gen Z revival, and I don't like doing that. But what do they call it? The quiet revival in England. That seems legit, like really legit. And I would love for something like that to happen here.
I think it was myth number 7, maybe. It was the one about income and it not being
Yeah, dechurching is happening to the upwardly mobile. Was
right. That was the myth,
Yeah.
and we were talking about it being the lower. And I got to thinking through that, and I just decided I'd sit and wait with it. Does that have any connection with, or maybe you could just offer more? It seemed to me that perhaps the middle or the middle class, so to say, it is sort of slipping away. It's getting squeezed, at least in America. And so more of who would have been middle class is now actually lower, just costs and all these other things.
Inflation.
Yeah. So I don't know. I'm not even sure what the question is, but does that seem a fair assessment of that, or perhaps not?
So we're getting in. I have more questions than answers in this area. Like an economist would be helpful here, but like it is the amount of money that the average person makes doesn't get you what it used to. So it creates more financial challenges. And the cost of living, not just in houses, but the expectation that your kids are going to have phones and, monthly bills and computers and cars and there's all these things. So life is more expensive. Money doesn't go as far. So yes, if financial challenges combined with a life change of some sort are fueling dechurching, then yes, I think you can make that argument. Here's what I worry about going down the pipe. I don't know how far down this is. I've not said this in public before, so I hope. So what makes me nervous? So some of this I just don't know if I can say public. Let's say we like what President Trump has done. Okay, and I'm not saying anything against it. His effectiveness has come through a lot of executive orders and things, being able to do a lot of what he wanted to do. The beauty of the country is, at some level, is that it takes a while to do things. and there wasn't as much polarity over the history of our country, and you had 3 branches to work things through. But now, as we become more polarized and there are means to get things done very fast, well, at some point, the other party is going to have it, and they're going to do the same thing. And then it's going to go back and forth, and we're going to become more polarized, and we can do things more fast. And the friction that creates in society, whichever side you land on the political spectrum, makes me very nervous. I think AI is coming and going to take more jobs than we possibly could fathom 20 years from now, and not just low-end jobs. I think lawyers, doctors, accountants, engineers, architects are going to be decimated. And that it's just there's going to be strife and upheaval in the scope of most of our ministries, and it makes me nervous. Maybe I'm dead wrong, and great. I would love to be wrong on any of those things, but I just think that if we thought COVID was hard, I think we need to learn the lessons and implement what we can now in the context of our church, so that we can weather the storms to come.
I'll just say you just gave a great plug for next year's fall conference.
Okay.
AI in ministry. Yeah,
What is it?
Be our AI, artificial intelligence,
It's
and
great.
ministry in the church. So just had to steal the mic from Luke, who stole it from
Sounds
Carl.
great.
I was just doing everybody a favor, taking it from no, I just wanted to, anecdotally, I don't have any data to back it up, but anecdotally, I can think of half dozen or more people, and probably more if I really put my mind to it, who fit in that middle. And maybe this is just a really ungenerous characterization, but if I think of people who are poor, truly poor, it's not that they're not working at all, but I can think of people in the middle who, like you were talking about, the squeeze, you put it in better words than I did, that's happening. They've taken on additional second jobs, those sorts of things. And the reason it connected for me was because some of the reasons of the different groups, many of them had, move or change of job or just don't have time. And that's where I drew that connection, was like, well, I can think of people who sometimes it was COVID related, but then also it's been, they don't have any margin in their life, and they're not going to church because they're working and doing other things. And there are people who are in the middle, but slipping. So just a thought.
I think
Carl.
I think you're right.
So, are you familiar with the book, The Black Swan?
I'm aware of it.
Okay. So it's something that doesn't fit our view. So the example is that all swans are white because that's all we've ever seen. And then a black swan appears, and now we have to change our view. Just how in the research, data gathering, those kinds of things, we didn't have COVID in the trajectory of where we saw things going,
Mm-hmm.
and it changed everything. So that may be a black swan. When we're using the data that we gather or that you've gathered, how do you factor in something you don't see coming? Well, you don't see it coming, so you can't factor it in.
Yeah. Well, I mean, our data was post-COVID, of course, but and so we had the benefit of having seen that come. Yeah, I mean, there have all, in the church there and in Israel too, like there have always been wars and famines and I mean, wars and famines were the two big ones, but there's been cultural upheaval, persecution. What we know is that God told us these things would happen and that his church would prevail. So that's what I know, and I will live and die on. I don't know what's coming. I don't know how hard it's going to be. I don't know what it's going to cost, but I know where this story is leading, and that's all that I have, and that's what I bring to our people. So, but there's at some level you can hear in the way I'm talking, I'm thinking, how can we as elders prepare our church best for whatever the next thing is? That's all we know to do.
Yeah, I'll just follow up on that, what you just said there. What are two of the most impactful things that you have done in your congregation in response to the data that you discovered in this survey?
That's a good question. Two. I mean, I do feel like we've implemented, of course, I told you we pulled our live feed. I began to preach toward the value of embodied worship and church membership more than I had done before. I realized, okay, I can't assume that people just understand why they should be at church on Sunday. So I began to really, wherever I found an opportunity, to speak to it, and hopefully a helpful and an invitational way that made people desire it. The investment we've made in our children and youth is significant. I mean, we've at a church we're not like a mega church, but at a church our size, it's unusual that the youth director would report directly to me, but I moved things around. I wanted him to report directly to me, not only because I believe that the investment in this age group is important, but I've got my own kids there, so it's extra important to me. And so I've been walking very closely, and on a Wednesday night, our youth has gone from in 4 or 5 years from 6 to 75, and now the challenge is trying to find regain the smallness. It's kind of like a church in a way. Like as a church grows, how do you make it always feel small? So, but we've done a lot in terms of trying to, as a church community, invest in 6th to 12th grade. And we're also investing in children, but we were already kind of doing that. We were trying to get better, but this was what we just had not done. And I didn't realize how it would re-engage the parents of that age group, because before that we had what we called the missing generations. It was high schoolers and their parents' age group, and they just weren't there. But the more we began to try and invest in 6th to 12th grade, the more we started seeing my age group and a little bit older really invest and be a part of community groups and come into church because they saw the value of their children being involved. So it's interesting. It didn't just help in youth, but like that there's a whole nother generation that it hit. What else did we do? I mean, when you say some of the biggest ones, I feel like those are some of the bigger ones. There's the missional confessional. I mean, we went from having, and please hear this, by God's grace, I'm so thankful. Like I'm not trying to, but we went from not having baptized a single person who wasn't biologically related to us for at least a decade. And right before the summer, I had sabbatical this summer. My last service, we baptized 26 people. And for us, there's churches baptizing a lot more, but that was a huge deal. And we had kids coming to faith. We had adults coming to faith. We had people who had just never been baptized that saw the value of it. And so that was really exciting to try and figure out, how do we remain faithful to what everything God has told us. And how do we in worship make that accessible? Not watered down, but how do we make it accessible and inviting without being seeker friendly or attractional?
Any last questions someone wants to ask? Otherwise, we'll way back. Jordan. Okay.
Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Appreciate all the data. We did read through your book in Dr. Christensen's class, so I've enjoyed taking all that in, and discussions we've had in class have been great. I know we specifically heard about, there was a church that kind of took this data early on, and maybe a larger one in Missouri that did some things and resulted in probably a lot of nudges being given, and a lot of people coming back into that specific congregation. If you could talk a little bit more, if you know some about that.
So we had to raise $100,000 for this research, which is why books like this don't get written, is because we're never going to make that much money. But somewhere in the orbit of this church in Columbia, Missouri, were the donors of the money to do the research. So as a thank you, we gave them our executive summary early. And they were the ones that really, before we had even named mainstream evangelicals, they were like, wait, so are you saying everything that I said in first session? And we're like, yeah, that's what we're seeing. And so they created both digital and personal approaches. Now, I can't speak a lot to the digital. I can say a few things, but they began to mobilize their people to identify new people to the community, and people who had stopped going from like beginning of COVID to then, because generally the people who stopped going to church were mainstream evangelicals, and to begin to just invite them, and the power of those invitations, it just worked. And there was one story of a woman. She was driving in her neighborhood, and she drove past a house where a moving truck was moving people in. And she drove past, and it just hit her. She turned around, she went up, introduced herself. Oh, you're new to the new to neighborhood. Glad to meet you. Are you looking for a school? Oh, okay. Are you looking for a church? And they're like, yes, actually, we're looking for a church. Come with me. I'll take you to my church. The moving truck was the thing that signaled it for her. I do think they're more digitally savvy than I am. There's some ways they were able to identify new people, and I just can't speak to that helpfully. But I think the real gold were people inviting other people they knew in that one category.
Thank you. Any other plans to do follow-up research? If you could get another $100,000 to, or whatever.
So actually, not me. So the publishers came back last year, and they were asking, what's your next thing? Like, this has been a good project. What's the next thing? And I said, I'm out. I have loved the project. It's been a huge learning curve. I'm very thankful. But there's some things, and I want to be a dad and a pastor, and I had some health issues, and I was just like, Ryan and Mike, you go with it. They've got all these great ideas. And so they've just completed the largest religious survey in history. So one of the big ones that people speak to is the Pew Religious Survey that comes out every, I don't know if it's 3 or 4 years. This one is over 3 times the size of Pew. It's 100,000 participants. And they finished it. They're getting the data back, and they're getting really significant insights that we just haven't had before. So that's going to be coming down the pike. They had to raise a ton of money for that, and they did it. I'm for the time being, if I do right, it's going to be more in the areas of church health, curious listening, things, discipleship, things like that.
I was going to say we could take an offering to help you with that $100,000, but now you're not. You don't
I don't
need
need
it.
it.
So
I don't need it.
Not gonna, no.
I
Thank
appreciate-
you.
Thank you all for having me.
Yeah, let's give them appreciation.